might want to flip the signs around now. Your name tags. Unless you want to be James for today. Wouldn't be bad.
You got a good life.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, thank you. Ready when you're ready.
We up yet?
Yep, we're up.
All right. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have a full board tonight, so we don't need to make any alternates available. With that, the first item on the agenda is petitioner right here.
You want to review any minutes?
All right, is it on there?
No, it isn't.
This, mine has it, but
The minutes?
Let's review the minutes then. Steve, why don't you read the
agenda item number 2, review and approval of minutes, February 14th, 2022.
Fine.
I'd make a motion to approve.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Second item, do we start in on the participants now? All right. Petitioner number 1. Petitioner, the CC 86 Main Street LLC is requesting the following on real property with an address of 86 Main Street, tax map U2, lot 32, M2 zone. Appeal of an administrative decision, a decision made by the building inspector concerning the imposition of impact fees assessed for 6 new apartments. With that,
I'm Hank Stevens. I'm a lawyer for the and this is Ben Stevens, the principal of the company.
Could you please speak in the microphone so I can hear? Thank you.
Sure, I'm
Yeah,
sorry. My name's Hank Stevens, and I am the lawyer for 86 Main. And this is Ben Stevens, principal of 86 Main. And we're here today to appeal a $25,728 impact fee for the work that Ben has done in the renovation of the old Masonic Hall, which is the property of 86 Main Street. And as you all know, Masonic Hall's right in the middle of downtown. It's got some architectural history, it's got some cultural history, and it's important for the downtown to continue to be a vital spot for the town. In fact, we were before this board, April 26, 2021. I don't know how many of you were here for that presentation. I know
Most of
there's
us.
been some turnover. But one of the points that we made is that this building, which was built in 1873 and used by the Masons throughout the years for over a century, was where they had their dinner events, they had their social events, where they had their rituals, and they did their business. Over the latter part of, more recently, the Masons have diminished from here. A number of Masons have diminished here. Oh, thank you. All right. Thanks a lot. The number of Masons have diminished, and it sort of became abandoned, and they sold the property recently to 86 Main. During that period of the diminution of the Masonic group, they let things go to whack a little bit. And when Ben bought the building, it needed a lot of refurbishment, and it was a 100-and-something-year-old building. So it needed a lot of upkeep to modernize it and bring it up to code. What we did is we came before you to get a variance to get the number of apartments to get 6 apartments put in the second and third floor there. And the second and third floor was where the Masons really did their business. The first floor is a retail and remains a retail space. Once we had gotten the approval from this board, we went to the planning board and got a site plan review approval. And we went back to the planning board in October, and the planning board determined that this building, the renovation of this building will provide public benefits which will enhance the economic vitality of downtown, improve a structure that is culturally and historically important, and promote the preservation and reuse of an existing building through rehabilitation of historic structures and energy conservation. A lot of money went into this. It was an important project for 86 Main, and we think it's an important project for the town because it kept the architectural value of the building by not dramatically changing the exterior, but really refurbishing and updating the interior at a great expense. After we had gone through this process with this board and the planning board, the building inspector reviewed the actual construction plans and issued a building permit. At the time that he did that, there was never any reference of possible impact fees. And what your ordinance says is that before a building permit can be issued, impact fees, if they're going to be imposed, need to be assessed. They need to be assessed before the building permit can be issued. Not only were they not assessed, they were never discussed. The building went forward, an awful lot of time and money went into it. There was important work done to state infrastructure, to the town's infrastructure, and a bunch of piping had to be replaced and repaired, and it was done at the company's expense under the supervision of the town. And the company went to the building inspector and said, okay, I want the certificate of occupancy. And for the first time, for the very first time, there was discussion about an impact fee. Now, this is after having gone through over a year of work on this project and having it be reviewed by many boards and people in the town. And as I said, the ordinance specifically says the impact fee will be assessed at the time the building permit is issued. What the building inspector did is he assessed and imposed that assessment when he was being asked for the building permit. And asked for the occupancy permit. And that's just wrong. If you don't, under your ordinance, tell people what it's going to be and give them an opportunity, like it's set forth in their statute, to go back to the planning board and get it waived, you can't then charge it. You can't hold up the certificate of occupancy because you haven't complied with the ordinance. And what we're objecting to is this last-minute assessment, at the very last minute, of over $25,000 in a project that cost a substantial amount of money and has done, according to your master plan, your zoning ordinance, and your planning board, an excellent job preserving a historic building in downtown. So what we're asking you for tonight is to say, A, the building inspector was wrong. If he was going to charge the $25,000 plus, he should have told the developer right up front, at the time the application for the building permit came in, and before the building permit was issued, what was going to happen, so he could include it in his budget. His unwillingness to do so, or his failure to do so, and then do it at the last minute, created a real problem for the financing. The $25,000 has been paid, but it was paid under protest, And what we're asking this board to do is to acknowledge that the building inspector made a mistake in not following your ordinance. And had he followed the ordinance, we wouldn't be here today, but it could have been included in the planning for this building, including going to the planning board to get a waiver of it, which we think, because of what the ordinance says, would have been granted. What the ordinance says is if the current approved use of the property would have such a demand on the town's infrastructure that it would be greater than what the proposed use is, it would be greater than those 6 small apartment buildings, that there is no impact fee. And that is why the developer believed, knowing that, when he didn't get any discussion of an impact fee at the beginning when it was supposed to be held, that that was the perspective that the building inspector had taken, was that this was not to be something that there was an impact fee. Now, we don't know why he changed his mind, or if he just made a mistake and didn't assess it and then did it later, but certainly what we felt was that because it wasn't discussed and assessed when it was supposed to be assessed, it was waived, or there was a reason that it wasn't going to be charged. And we weren't granted our right to appeal, which is something we inherently have a right to. So what we're asking for you to do is to say the building inspector was wrong and that the $25,728 will be repaid to the developer. Any questions?
I think it's pretty straightforward. Anybody got any questions?
One quick question. Mr. Stebbins actually paid the impact fee?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
Paid it under protest.
Want to be clear? Okay, thank you.
Is there anybody in the public that would like to speak to this matter? No? Fine. I'll briefly open the public hearing section and let it close. I'll open it up to the board for further discussion. Anybody got any comments or concerns, or? Steve?
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely, that's what this is for.
Is there are no planning board this went before the planning board?
Twice.
Okay, there are no minutes attached. There was no discussion about impact
On
fees?
impact fees, never a discussion until the very last minute, first time it was discussed.
What's the very last minute when you were presented
When
a bill?
I asked for a certificate of occupancy.
I'm sorry?
For the inspection of the certificate of occupancy.
So what happened, and I have the emails that I can show you, was Ben sent an email to the building inspector and said, I want to schedule an appointment for an inspection so that you can issue the certificate of occupancy. And the building inspector at that point got back to him and said, oh, by the way, I have to do impact fee assessment. It was that late in the game.
By the looks of the records, it seems like that was March 31st of this year.
Right.
Okay. So that's when it was brought up.
I don't know how deep we can get into this, but
We can just talk about whatever we want, we just have to be,
I know. Well, we were switching building inspectors around that time.
My original building permit was with the building inspector at that start. Peter did the building all the way through, from start to
He
end.
did?
Yes.
Yes, so he was involved really from the time of the hearing.
He
all the
issued
hearings.
me my building permit to begin.
Okay, so Mike wasn't
No.
involved at all?
No.
Okay,
That is the current interim building inspector you're speaking of?
Yes.
Okay.
okay. So we can rule out the lapse of,
Right.
okay.
for the record, all the butters and everything have been notified? and
Yes.
everything?
Mr. Chair, just I'm sort of ignorant here. Get a clarification, may I?
Sure.
You speak of a new development and the impact fee assessment, if I can find it here. moment here. The distinction between a building permit and a certificate of occupancy. And here it says, shall not issue a certificate of occupancy until the impact fee has been paid in full.
Right, but if
I'm
you
not
go
sure
above
the
that,
distinction between the building permit and the certificate of occupancy.
so if you go above that in the ordinance, it says there's a title, Assessment of Impact Fee. That's just a few paragraphs or a paragraph above that. And it says, impact fees shall be assessed by the code enforcement officer prior to or as a condition to issuance of a building permit on new development or to compensate the town of Newmarket for the proportional share of the public capital facility costs generated by this development. So it says before the building permit, you have to assess that.
Okay, the building permit.
And then it says no building permit in the new development until the code enforcement officer has set an impact fee. So it's just, someone screwed up, or he looked at it and thought there wasn't an impact.
Or made a mistake.
Well, and I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt that if he initially looked at it under the code and looked at the section that speaks about how you determine what the impact fee is, if he said, which might have been very logical, that what the Shriners were doing in there, having dinner parties, having a big kitchen, having social events, having meetings, would cause more cost to the infrastructure of the city than the 6 small apartments were, he could have just determined that there was no impact fee due. And that's why, even if you knew about the impact fees, if the developer knew about the impact fees, he wouldn't question that fact that there was no assessment. And just determined that the building inspector had made a determination that there was no impact fee.
Well, that was a question I had too, and upon reading this, the Masons had many events up there, but they weren't there all the time. They weren't there overnight, I don't believe.
No, but
But these 6 apartments are there all the time, so I don't think how it could be less than what the Masons did.
well, not necessarily, because these are 6 small apartments, so they're not family apartments, they're not kids, they're small apartments that the people are at generally only at night. And that can be significantly less water usage, for example, than during the occupancy during the day, during social events or business events.
Okay.
And in fact, if you look at the numbers, if you were to just go and look at the numbers that are assessed for water, for example, by businesses or social clubs, things like that, the numbers for water usage are generally higher than they are for apartment residential uses.
How many bedrooms are in these apartments?
It's 2 studio apartments and 4 one-bedrooms.
Have you made any attempt to go back to the planning board and seek redress through them?
No, because the ordinance specifically says that the place where to come is to the zoning board.
Why is that?
I don't know, but that's what your
Where does it
ordinance
say
says.
that?
It says a party aggrieved by a decision made by the code enforcement officer pursuant to assessment or collection of impact fees authorized by this section may appeal such decision to the zoning board of adjustment. So it specifically instructs us to come to this board.
Yeah, well, I think we're the Board of Statutory Authority.
No, I can't hear very well.
What? I wasn't talking, I was speaking to the chair and said I think we're the Board of Statutory Authority, but that nothing would preclude them from returning to the
Correct.
planning board and applying for a fee waiver.
In my opinion, the way I understand that to be, if they had applied for a waiver and were denied it, then they would come to us. but they never even applied for a waiver or even asked for it. And there are alternative methods of calculating impact fees that are applicable, and they have the tools in their tool chest to address that. Now, if they go to the planning board and are denied, then we can take a look at it and determine. But I think at this point, in my opinion, it's a little bit premature until they've exhausted their avenues through the planning board.
Mr. Chairman, the system is set out, if I might, please. The system is set out so that there is an assessment of it before the building permit is issued. At that point, you have the right to go to the planning board.
Correct.
What's different is here, the thing went all the way through, and the building, the occupancy permit was withheld until this money was paid. So that the opportunity to avail itself of appellate rights had gone, because we've already paid them. So what we have to do is we have to follow the ordinance and come to this board, which is what specifically says in your ordinance, and ask you to determine that a mistake was made by the building inspector and that the funds should be returned.
If the building inspector had assessed them at the building permit stage, would you have paid them?
No, we would have gone to the planning board, as we have a right to under your ordinance, and appealed that decision.
So the only difference here is the timing.
The difference here is timing, but the timing is very significant. Because what had happened, because of the way that the building inspector imposed this, when the apartments had already been leased and there were timelines on it, that we needed this done, we didn't have an opportunity to object to it because of the failure to timely assess the fee. That's why the ordinance specifically gives the assessment at the beginning, so the developer will have an opportunity to appeal it. And that was what was deprived here. That's what we didn't get. The only way we got it was when we were hanging out there and he strung us up with it. And that's just wrong. And it's a violation of the due process rights under the New Hampshire and the U.S. Constitution. And under the statutes and your ordinance, if this board refuses to act on this, then the next step that we will take is go to the Superior Court. And that will involve more than $28,000 of the town's money in defending that.
I have something to say. It is true, the ordinance states impact fees shall be assessed by the code enforcement officer prior to or as a condition to issuance of a building permit on new development, and that the 32:238G1 states no building permit shall be issued for new development as defined in this statute in this section until the code enforcement officer has assessed the impact fee. They got their building permit.
Correct.
Right? I don't, when I look at the rest of the ordinance, Bob, the term new development, I think it's clear that there are other provisions of the zoning ordinance in New Hampshire law that are clear. The project's subject to impact fees. The term new development is defined later in the same section that they cite to, 32:238C1, and it says new development. The term new development means activity which results in the creation of new residences or residential units, the conversion of a legally existing use or additions thereto, which would result in a net increase to the number of residential uses, the conversion of an existing use to another use, if such
So that's
change
the one I
creates
think-
don't interrupt.
I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry.
A net increase in the demand on public capital facilities that are subject of the impact fee assessment methodologies adopted by the planning board. 3211 defines residential unit to mean one or more rooms designed, occupied, or intended for occupancy as a separate living quarter with cooking, sleeping, and sanitary facilities provided within the dwelling unit. For the exclusive use of a single household or family, I think, to me, the ordinance is clear. The project would be subject to impact fees because it was a new development project. I don't know what happened at the planning board. It's not clear to me, but I think the applicant should have sought a waiver of those impact fees, and I'd be inclined to uphold the decision of the.
Also, in the ordinance, it says, an aggrieved party by a decision made by the code enforcement officer pursuant to assessment or collection of impact fees authorized by this section may appeal such decision to the zoning board of adjustment as provided in RSA 676:15. It may. What I think really needs to be done is they need to go back to the planning board and say, we've done a lot more than we want. We want the impact fee waived and we want a check returned to us.
Yeah.
If the planning board says,
That'd be fine.
bye, then we'll come back and we'll be happy to listen to the evidence. And I think more than likely we would look on it favorably. But at this point in time, I don't think you've exhausted all of your avenues. And yeah, I'm speaking for myself here. Anybody else have anything else?
I was going to speak to the practicality of this. I am in the same business that you're in, and we're periodically told the fact that you didn't know about it doesn't preclude you from spending it or knowing about it. So as we go through these kinds of developments, that's on our checklists, along with another 50 items, to make sure that we don't miss what could have occurred. But I agree on the substance of it, that we'd like to keep this within the. I don't want to go to the Supreme Court on this. I'd like to follow through with the planning board, see what they have to, and they may just say go for it. I don't know.
Well, I think what's interesting is 2 doors down added 2 apartments, and were never assessed a impact fee or a hookup fee or anything like that. So how does it all of a sudden, why am I charged it when 2 doors down added 2 apartments and?
Really good question. I don't know. I don't know
Exactly.
the 2 apartments. But the impact fee is the big one for us. Of course, it's schools. That's why I asked.
But there's no school impact.
Yeah, I mean that's why I asked what was in it. But
Now, isn't it true that in New Hampshire law, it's a precept that every person is expected to know what's in the laws and what's in the regulations they're applying to? So did you read the zoning ordinance before? Were you aware that impact fees could be part of the calculation?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
The reason that I mentioned the definition, which the member read, is the last section of the definition. The very last section of the definition says, if the use that's being converted to would have less impact than the existing use, it's not a new use. And that is exactly what we looked at. And that says to you, okay, it's reasonable that no impact fee is in. So this was a mistake that was made by the building inspector, and it was something that we thought he had a logical reason for. I can't, I know the law, and I'm telling you the law tonight, and what I'm saying is that it was reasonable for the developer to believe that what the inspector had thought when he issued the building permit was that no impact fee would be due under that specific provision of the definition of new development.
I don't want to get into a debate, but it was an empty building for years. And to assume that 4 units are going to have less impact, I understand why one would have trouble trying to determine what impact it would be.
Right, but if I kept it as current use, I could have a party there every single night as a social gathering and not do one single thing to the entire building. And that, you know,
I hear.
yeah.
And it could be cooking.
It
because
could
they
be,
cook.
I
I
could,
know.
yeah.
So I guess the point is not, was the impact fee thought about? It was thought about, and based on this, and the fact that the guy didn't assess it as he's supposed to, there's a reasonable assumption that's made that there's no impact fee.
I see both sides.
Are we ready for a motion?
Depends on what the motion is. Are we ruling on?
I put together a motion and I
Okay.
wrote it down. Just while it's true that the Newmarket zoning ordinance states that impact fees shall be assessed by the CFO prior to or as a condition of the issuance of a building permit on a new development, and that section 238G1 states that no building permit shall be issued for new development as defined in this section until the CEF has assessed the impact fee. It is also true that in New Hampshire, every person is presumed to know the law, and so an applicant is presumed to know the law. And that's cited as Town of Nottingham versus Newman, 147, New Hampshire, 136, 2001, and Bennett versus Hampstead, 157, New Hampshire, 477, 485, 2008. It therefore has to be presumed that plaintiffs knew that impact fees are part of the ordinance and are required for new developments. Given that the plaintiff has not exhausted his options with the planning board, it is premature for this board to rule on a waiver to the impact fee requirement. Further, the CEF does not have the authority to waive impact fees as set out in the zoning ordinance. Given that the impact fees are clearly required by the ordinance, the CEF acted appropriately in assessing them when an error was discovered, and this board upholds that decision. That being said, the board would recommend that the plaintiff return to the planning board to request an alternative calculation method and request relief. If relief is then denied by the planning board, the plaintiff can return to the ZBA without prejudice and request a variance from the fees based on the criteria, specifically the hardship criteria of the appeal process.
Second.
Is there any discussion?
I would have a problem voting one way or another on that because based on what their testimony is, I can see how they would say that there was an error in the process.
Correct.
So, given that, I can't say that they should have known that there may be an impact fee when their testimony states a clear argument that would show that there may not have been an impact fee. So while there was no communication, we can't say what one party, or, what the CEF was saying or thinking during this process.
Correct.
So I would have an issue with voting one way or another on that because I don't necessarily agree with how it
Okay.
was presented. There's a lot there to unpack. That's the other thing.
The only thing I'm stating here is that we uphold the CEF's decision and that we return this back to the planning board, which is the appropriate house to waive or assess an alternative or basically make the operation whole.
We can't waive these impact fees, right?
If they go to the planning board and the planning board says, no, we're still assessing them for the full value, and they feel that there's an alternative method or they're due no impact fees because of the improvements they made, then yes, we can sit here and listen to that criteria and rule accordingly. But right now, the planning board hasn't even had a chance to weigh in on this And they have the tools in their arsenal to address impact fees. We can listen to it afterwards and rule for or against an aggrieved party.
I have a problem with, I think there's enough blame on both sides. I just see that the building inspector didn't do his complete job, and these people should have been aware of. So I don't know where to, so I guess I'm not disagreeing with you to send it back to the planning board where they can wipe it right out if they want, or say you gotta pay. But because we don't, I don't think we have the authority to wipe out $25,000.
We would if they can provide information that says they had to spend $50,000 to bring this up to bring it in compliance, or they've got $50,000 worth of impacts that could be waived. We don't have any numbers in front of us to work with. We're just.
So I think the only way you can waive is in this specific case where they're appealing the code or building inspector's decision. Whereas they would go to the planning board, they can waive it, and then it looks like they can go to Superior Court if the planning board denies it.
Correct. If the planning board denies it, they can come back to us.
But we could waive it tonight?
If you uphold the
reverse.
appeal.
The decision of the zoning board of adjustment may be appealed to Superior Court. We're not making a decision on this. We're sending it back to the appropriate.
Right, I mean, you could make a decision, but you could also, yeah.
My last word is I totally agree with you, Wayne. This is not a one did one in. This is, the developer needs to understand what the rules are, what
Right.
that you do budgets, you put in all kinds of factors to cover yourself. And I understand if I was relying on the building inspector
Right.
or whoever, I'd be really upset.
Yeah.
It didn't come up in the conversation.
I do, I
Hey,
see
by the
both
way.
sides.
Yeah.
And there's enough,
Culpability wrong there.
yeah. So that's why I ask if we don't have the right to waive $25,000, then, and the planning board does, then it should go back to the planning board. Does that make sense?
That's what the motion says, right?
That's what my motion
On the
says.
table.
And
That's-
if somebody can point me otherwise, I'll withdraw my motion. I got no problem with that. I'm not, but I just see this as the cleanest way of addressing it without having all the information in front of us. Right now, we have the statements of an aggrieved party, and we don't have a lot of information backing us up. And I think it would be premature for us to rule on this until they've been given a chance to present their numbers to an agency that has the authority and the wherewithal to look into it.
I think that makes great sense.
I don't want to have anybody spend a lot of money going to Superior Court where the only people that are going to make out on this are the attorneys. Where, I'm sorry, the planning board and the code enforcement officer need to address this, and then if they choose not to address it, then we'll make a decision one way or another.
So to summarize the motion, we are punting to the planning board.
Correct.
Exactly.
We are
Okay.
affirming the code enforcement officer's decision and asking them to go to planning.
Well, that's where I have a problem, because I'm not sure that, well, I guess we're affirming it. I guess we have to.
If I might, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
By affirming the building department inspector's decision, you are making an appealable decision to the Superior Court. That's where decisions are to be made under your ordinance. That's the next step we have.
They may be.
Yeah.
Well, they may be, because you may not want to appeal, but we will appeal.
I don't see how we can uphold his decision, because I think he's partly at fault.
Right. And that's where I was having trouble, like, I don't agree that, with that, so.
By fault or mistake or whatever, but
Okay.
it says right here, he shall, and that's, to me, that's a key word, shall, be assessed by the code enforcement officer, and he didn't do it. So I don't see how I could uphold his decision, you know, to 6 months later assess, or 9 months later, or whatever it is, 6 months later, assess impact fees.
Well, the way I look at it, I
But-
think you just made an honest mistake.
Well, I think, I'm not denying that, but on the other hand, they should know on a checklist, you've got impact fees.
If I can speak.
So why don't you split it down the middle and?
Because there should, I mean, 2 buildings down built 2 units, didn't be assessed, and then it's clear in the ordinance that.
There's a question about whether it should be.
And I
And
understand
it's
that.
up to the building inspector to make that decision, and they never made a decision at that point.
So we have 2 things. One is that the building inspector has failed to assess it or failed to collect it on another building that should be classified as a new development.
That's a jump. You don't know
And-
the conditions of that.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
okay, but just,
inappropriate.
but this was what we understood,
Yeah,
okay?
but you, that's.
But just, and secondly, there's a provision in the ordinance that we believe could be applied to this, that says it was not, impact fees are not applicable to this because it's a change of use that has less cost to the town than if we used the grandfathered use that was already in place for 100 years.
But that argument would belong back at the planning board.
Correct.
That's where you should be arguing that instead of in front of us, I think.
But we weren't given the opportunity.
What's that?
They never assessed.
And we're trying to offer you the opportunity.
Yeah.
And we will be happy to listen. If they don't do it, we'll be happy to listen to you and deal with it at the appropriate time. That's my thoughts.
Could I make a suggestion? Mr.
Absolutely.
Chair? Perhaps the issues that one of your members has and that I have with the legally written motion you just filed is that it makes a lot of determinations. And perhaps you could just say something to the effect of the appropriate place, we believe the appropriate place for this to be determined is in the planning board, and that it should be taken to the planning board, and we're not going to make a decision today.
You're
I-
thinking that-
I
I'm
will-
fine. Okay.
I'm making-
Withdraw your motion, I'll withdraw my motion.
Yeah, that's, yes.
Yeah, I would be very uncomfortable saying that I approve or whatever wording of the CEF. I cannot say that.
I agree.
So I'm perfectly fine with that wording. I'll try to summarize of, so have we formally withdrawn then? Or-
Yes, we have.
Okay, so motion to say that the zoning board currently is the inappropriate board to present this case to. We feel as the zoning board of adjustments that the planning board of Newmarket is the appropriate board to discuss this case. We therefore do not have an opinion as of right now, and if there is a need in the future to come back to the zoning board, we will hear the case.
Attorney Stebbins,
Yes.
would you be fine if we just tabled this for a period of time?
I'd prefer that you not.
Okay. Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Attorney Stebbins, are you of the opinion right now that the plan board would be an appropriate spot for this conversation? Based on what was just
I'm willing
said?
to, we're
Yeah.
very willing to listen to the recommendation of this board. Let me start with that.
Okay.
And that will be a very important consideration. We're concerned because the ordinance sets out a specific appellate right.
Mhm.
And the appellate right is to come to the zoning board. It's right in the zoning ordinance. And that's where the town itself, in adopting the zoning ordinance, the whole town said it's supposed to go. So we're disappointed that this isn't going to be resolved tonight, which we think it should be. And that is going to weigh heavily on our decision also.
Understood. The way I look at this, if you're willing to go to the planning board, is that the cleanest way would be withdraw of the petition, and then you go to the planning board and ask them for a waiver, and then if you're unsatisfied with their decision, then that would go to Superior Court. So either way, it would go to Superior Court.
Right,
Uh,
but, oh, I'm sorry.
No,
But it's,
it could come back here.
It could, but based on what I just heard, dialogue between board members and plaintiff, maybe that'd be the cleanest way.
And if he came back here with the documentation, you know, as to what the offsetting costs for the impact fees would be, I'd be more than happy to listen to it.
The only thing is that there's a time period where a person can appeal
Correct.
CEO's decision, so that's the only hiccup I can see right now.
Our greatest pleasure would be to resolve this on home ground and not run this thing, you know. And I think the planning board has very much the same attitude. They're very client. This is a very, this board leans very much in the favor of landowners. And I think maybe that's the best way to do it.
well, we appreciate the recommendation. We're not willing to withdraw the petition at this point. But if the decision is made that you're not going to make a decision, you're not going to act on our request, then, until after we go to the planning board and request the same thing of them, we will certainly listen to that. But we need to reserve our rights to follow what remedies are
Fully
most
appreciate
appropriate.
that.
Okay. So, I was worried about, so it's not a table, it'd be a continuance to a following meeting,
On our part?
unless you make it, yeah, because they're tabling, the idea is to table this, right?
No,
Or
we
make a
would be
decision.
putting it in front of the planning board.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I think that's what my motion said.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I understood.
We'll have to go to the official record. I'm pretty sure that's what I was going for.
Can you read back the motion? Is that something you took down? Okay.
It,
No, his motion.
it was mine that I went off the cuff.
Well, I'm gonna need to hear what's on the table before I vote.
James' motion was that that the ZBA is currently the inappropriate place to appeal this decision. We recommend going forward to the planning board of Newmarket, to approve or deny the case, and if they deny, then they are welcome back to the ZBA.
Yeah. Thank you.
So if I might just want to interject one last thing, and I just want everybody to be aware of what the full law says. Because this particular statute is under a specific, this ordinance is under a specific statute, that statute says that where we should appeal to is the Superior Court. And it says it very clearly. So we came here because that's what we thought would be the way to do it in-house, without bringing in the Superior Court.
So
Where we should, under the law, appeal this to is not to the planning board, is not to the zoning board, but to the Superior Court. This is what we were trying to avoid.
So we aren't ruling against you, though. So
You don't have to, because what the law says is this kind of ordinance, which is a very special kind of ordinance, it's an innovative ordinance. You go directly to the Superior Court if you feel it's been violated.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's why we had come here first.
Because our ordinance says may.
Well, it does, it says may. And it also says, excuse me, I can read it to you. It's at the beginning of the ordinance. It says specifically, the ordinance is authorized under RSA 674:21 as an innovative land use control. And if you look at 674:21, you find that the appeals on those ordinances go right to the Superior Court.
But sir, I can't imagine, as a practical matter, we wouldn't take it. It doesn't say you can't go to the planning board. So why would we not just,
It says where you're supposed to go.
but it doesn't say you can't go to the planning board.
Well, we didn't go to the planning board because we didn't have notice. We went to the planning board
But you do-
twice.
But you do now. So, I mean, I get it, but
We have a motion on the floor, do we have a second?
second,
I'm not gonna support it, the motion, and I'll tell you why. In my opinion, the best thing to do is to uphold the decision of the administrative employee and recommend that they take a administrative appeal with the planning board. So that's what I would have preferred.
waiver.
A waiver, excuse me.
So we can.
So I'm just gonna vote nay, just so we're clear. And I just wanted to, I want the record to be clear as to why.
can you explain that one more time, please?
What my thought is, Al, is when appeals made to us, we have to apply the ordinance in this sort of this same way as the official would have. I don't know that I would have applied it exactly the way it happened here. I don't know what happened here, but I think there's enough notice in other portions of our ordinance
Gotcha.
that it should have been known that
Gotcha.
the impact fees are. So that's
I got
that's
you.
why I'd vote to affirm the decision. Just
I got you.
so that's me.
Just a reminder, there's a motion and a second.
Pardon?
There's a motion and a second.
Okay, we can vote on the motion,
Or you could amend the motion.
we can amend the motion.
Withdraw and
Withdraw.
You can do whatever you want.
Do what you want. There's a motion. Take a vote on it. That's what I would recommend.
Okay, we'll take a vote on it. James?
Aye.
Aye. Steve?
Nay.
Aye.
I'm gonna vote nay. So we have 3 ayes.
Motion passes 3-2.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, as I said earlier today, I'm gonna have to go, I'm sorry.
We have a full board, so that works out fine.
I'm a mere alternate.
All right. You guys sit down too quick. Thank you, thank you. That was educational. I appreciate it.
was.
Thank
Good
you.
one.
Can't wait to see what happens.
I know.
Okay.
That's what makes it fun, is
Oh,
these.
yeah.
Petitioner. Item 2 on our agenda tonight. Petitioner CC Railroad Street LLC is requesting the following on real estate property with an address of 3 Railroad Street, tax map U3, lot 138A, M2A zone. Appeal an administrative decision made by the the building official regarding section 32-5, nonconformity, 32-9, special use permits, 32-11, definitions, 32-46A, M2A district, 32-56, table of permitted uses, and 32-39, dimensions table concerning the rehabilitation of the structure, specifically the decision that the lot requires 50-foot frontage and that the application demonstrates a horizontal expansion of the existing facility. Special exception 1, section 32-5, 2B, nonconformity, to permit the upward expansion of a nonconforming structure. 2, section 3246A, M2 district, to permit 8 units on a property of less than 2 acres. A variance from section 32-89, dimensions table, to permit 8 dwelling units on a non-conforming lot that is less than an acre in area. Okay, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much.
Long time no see.
And I appreciate all the time you've taken for us tonight. And we want to turn to another underutilized property in the town, which is some old railroad. Hopefully you're getting plans. A couple plans. One is marked number 1, and that's the existing conditions plan. And let me give you a little history of this lot. This lot is a not fairly badly non-conforming lot. It was carved out when the B&M Railroad was about to file bankruptcy, and the B&M was trying to sell off any property that it could to raise money for its bankruptcy. The railroad thus divided all these little lots down there by the railroad, and this one happened to have 2 old warehouses on it that were used by the B&M. Those warehouses were built a long, long time ago. The stated purpose of the town's M2 zone, A zone, is to protect, enhance, and expand the commercial and social and residential functions of the downtown village area. The 2 old warehouses certainly don't serve that purpose. One of the town's master plan stated purposes is to promote repurposing and/or redevelopment of vacant and deteriorating properties that would contribute to the expanding tax base. I'd ask, as we go through these numerous issues that we're going to deal with, that you keep this in mind, and that what we're doing is in accordance with what the stated purpose of the zoning ordinance is and what the town master plan requests. So if we start at the beginning, there were a couple mistakes made by the building inspector. The first one was that he said that the existing non-conforming lot requires 50 feet of frontage. Well, it's a grandfathered lot. It's grandfathered prior to the ordinance being set in, and it's been there. The town has been taxing it. There has never been anyone that said you can't use it, and this is a perfect example of a grandfathered lot that just got stuck there as a matter of happenstance because the B&M was struggling, and the town let it do that. The town approved that. It's existed for a long time.
Can you repeat that, please?
Yes. This is a non-conforming use
Got it.
that was approved by the town planning board in a subdivision. And it's been that way ever since that day, way back in early 1970s, late 60s. And no one has ever said this is a legal lot. And no one has ever complained about it, and no one has ever appealed it to the court. It has been accepted by the town that this is a lot. it's on the tax map, it's everywhere. So what we're saying is that it's a pre-existing grandfathered use lot, and that it doesn't need to meet the requirement of 50-foot frontage. However, I will say, and if you take a look at number 2, the plan number 2, you'll see a graded area, a shaded area, which is on the proposed plan. That shaded area is the easement that this lot has for access to the road, and it's been that way for a long time. We continue to use that lot. It's a deeded easement, and it's been there for a long time. Now, I'm going to assume that that's why the town planning board approved it back when it did. Because why would you approve a lot that didn't have any frontage? So this is the issue that we're dealing with this lot. This is just one of the many hardships we're dealing with in trying to deal with.
So this easement exists?
It does exist. So that's number 1. Number 2 is that the building inspector, I believe by mistake, said that this called for a horizontal expansion of an existing grandfathered structure. And as you'll see, from it comparing number 1 and number 2, in fact, what this is doing is reducing the horizontal. That means this way. That means the depth across the land, not vertical. We're reducing the size. In fact, we're removing one of the existing warehouses spaces, and we are reducing the size of the other space so that we have a total of about 1,000 square feet of reduction in horizontal space. So I think that was just an error, him not understanding horizontal versus vertical. So those are the two that we start off with our appeal, saying that these were improper decisions or mistakes by the building inspector.
Could you repeat that? I see where the little building on the left is removed. And what else are you removing?
Well, the other building, if you could, and I didn't do an overlay, I apologize, but if you compare the two properties, the other building is 5,000 square feet, and we're reducing it. So that between the reduction, which is 600 square feet, and the 500 square foot reduction, we're doing 1,100 square foot reduction in horizontal nonconformity.
Okay.
Okay. So we believe that that's a mistake. We believe that he meant vertical, because it is intended to be a 3-story building when we finish. We're going to shrink the footprint substantially, and then we're going to build it up three stories from 1 story. So that is a vertical expansion of the non-conforming use. And as you'll see in our application for special exceptions, we have asked for the vertical expansion. So we're saying he was wrong about it being horizontal, but he's right, there has to be a special exception here, and it was a vertical one that he meant to say, I think.
So how much of the existing building are you, the existing, the actual people, not the outsheds, but the existing building you're planning on removing?
600 square feet.
Okay.
And then the 500 square foot building will go.
Because it's clear on there that, you know, the outline of the buildings are different sizes, so that corresponds.
Got it.
I keep seeing this word impact on on the piece of paper. I assume that's been covered.
On which piece of paper?
What I'm looking at right now. I'm talking about impact.
He's talking
Oh, we're talking about a different kind of impact. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
hope,
no, it's not an impact fee. No, what we're
no, but I hope you've.
we'll deal with the impact fee absolutely on this before we draw our
We'll
building.
get issued impact fee first,
Cart before the horse.
It's all right. Okay.
Yeah, I do have for Attorney Stebbins on your special exception request, B, I believe, it's 32-46. When I go there, that's for the M2 district. I think the proper, so the zoning, I think for this property is M2A,
Mhm.
and that'd be a special use permit for the planning board.
Okay.
So I think that would be
We'll
withdrawn.
withdraw that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll withdraw that.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yep, you're welcome.
You ready to continue, or do you want to deal with them one at a time?
We're dealing with the up.
Yeah.
So, we should probably deal with the administrative decision first.
Yes.
Is there anyone out in the audience that would like to speak on behalf or against this project? Because I'll open it up to public comment while we're chatting amicably amongst ourselves. I wish we had a copy of the deed just to confirm it, because there were some interesting things that occurred in the 70s. And I would just like to see it. I mean, if there's an easement in place, then that makes it all well and good. But on nonconformity, it does say that on a new or changed use, you comply with all of the dimensional requirements.
What we'd have to do otherwise is apply for a variance. And the reason that we felt it was better to do this, to explain it this way, is because this is the way it's always been. Since the 1970s, this is where it's been. And the road's in there, the parking lot's in there, and it's just there as is shown on the plan. We would prefer not to have to go through the variance question, because we really believe it's a grandfathered lot. It's continued to be used during that time. And it is not a situation where we're going to significantly increase the traffic.
I'm looking to avoid that also. That's why I was asking if there was a copy of the, written copy of the easement anywhere.
So there was an original easement that wasn't recorded. And what we and that's been there since 1973, and it's been used. There also was recently, at the time that Mr. Stebbins bought the property, a reconfirming of that by the landholder on it. I can get this board a copy of the confirmation of it, which says that this thing's been there forever.
I know it's been there forever. I've been in town for 42 years.
I didn't have it. But this is, I didn't bring it, I apologize.
Makes sense.
That could be a condition of your action that I get a copy of it.
That's fine. That makes life a lot easier if there's one of those there, because obviously something like an easement goes with the property and
Yeah.
understood.
Yeah, so it's the question on horizontal expansion. Did one occur?
In looking at the drawings that I've got, I'm not certain that,
Is one to occur? Yeah.
pardon?
Is one to occur, not one has occurred. Sorry. Go ahead.
I don't see that they're asking for one, but we don't have any architectural drawings, and the scale on this is kind of loosey-goosey. But just the quick calculation I did shows that the proposed is a smaller footprint than the, so.
And you said 1,100 feet were being
Removed.
That includes the outbuilding and 500 feet percent.
And 600 feet.
It's smaller.
Yeah.
than this. So that works. Nobody's come in to speak, so I'm gonna close the public input session, and we'll continue on with the discussion amongst ourselves. And we got enough information to act on the CEF's decision.
Yeah, just make it conditional on a
Confirmation of the easement.
easement.
Let me just, it's easier if I write it down, I think. Okay. I'll make a motion that we overturn the CEF decision, read the horizontal expansion and the 50-foot frontage with the provision that a information confirming the existence of the right-of-way into the parcel be provided before any work is accomplished on the site.
That's already recorded.
Pardon?
That's already recorded.
Yeah. Already recorded, yeah.
I second that.
Okay. We're getting somewhere. Is there any more discussion on the motion in the second? James, why don't you start on the voting?
I will start with an aye.
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 Steve?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Pass. Thank you. Now
So-
we get on to the real stuff.
So, the next one, we withdraw in light of it being filed with the wrong group, and we apologize for that. Then section 3 is the variance. And the variance is to allow more than permitted housing units on this grandfathered non-conforming lot of less than an acre.
Excuse me, Mr. Attorney, Mr. Chair, may I? May I?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
there's two special exceptions, I think.
Oh, I'm
Right.
sorry, did I skip one?
Yeah, so one of them, A, which I think
You're
you
right.
you need to apply for, petition for.
Okay.
That's for the upward expansion.
Thank you, so
It's just the
it's the second one.
It's the
that
second
you're
one, correct.
addressing. Okay,
Yep.
good. So then we get back to the expansion issue. And if you go back to section 2A, it is requesting a special exception from this board to allow a vertical expansion of the proposed 4,400 feet of the existing building that will be retained. And what we're proposing to do, as you know, as I've said, is to go up 3 stories to make it practical to use a building in this footprint for housing. And there are 4 criteria that are established. The proposed upward expansion will not have any impact on the neighboring properties. In fact, it should be a significant improvement. It's removing deteriorated eyesores and building a modern, code-compliant, attractive building in its place. In the neighborhood, there are office buildings and residential buildings, other residential buildings, and this would be an 8-unit residential building. And can you tell us just the number of rooms, bedrooms?
Yep, they would all be 2 bedrooms.
Which would each be 2 bedrooms, and it would have sufficient parking. The proposed upward expansion will not exceed the ordinance height restrictions. And I believe that you'll find that the ordinance height restrictions provide for 50 feet, and these would be under 50 feet. No part of the structure is located in the 100-year floodplain. Oh, I'm sorry, 45 feet. And no part of the structure is located in the 100-year floodplain, which is true, and I believe it's stated on the plan. The expansion will not render the lot proportionately less adequate. In fact, it will make it more proportionally adequate. Once again, we've got an empty lot with deteriorating old railroad warehouses that has a square footage that is 1,100 feet greater than what we're going to build. So we're reducing that horizontal violation. We're also removing a basically non-used, deteriorating building and creating a new taxable building for the town, which, as I've said at the beginning, is one of the goals of the master plan.
I think one other point to that is we're going to be increasing the pervious soil by a good amount. There's a big drain issue right around that area that will greatly help this area.
I guess I've got one question. Will that building take an upward expansion? I was out looking at it, and those pilasters don't look like they're in very good shape.
No, it's going to have to be rebuilt.
They're going to have to be rebuilt.
Yeah.
The railroad track side of things looks like it's pretty well plumbed and might be salvageable.
I would want to bring it all up to code.
Yep, I understand. So basically, you're going to demolish it and rebuild it.
I had a structural engineer walk through, and
He cringed.
he did quite a bit. Yep.
I haven't been into it in a few years, but a few years ago it was creaky.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay, now this special exception applies only to the vertical expansion.
That's
We still
correct.
have some other items to deal with here.
Right.
Any discussion, gentlemen?
It's pretty cut and dry. I mean,
It meets all the criteria.
If the criteria is met, we don't even have discretion. We have to grant it. So I'd vote to a motion to approve this special exception as provided in 32-5 2B of the Newmarket zoning ordinance to permit the upward expansion of a conforming structure.
I second it.
Okay, all those in favor? Steve, you go.
Aye.
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 Thank you, Joe.
We're going up.
So then we turn to the variance. And what we're doing is we're proposing to put 8 dwelling units in this non-conforming lot that's less than an acre. And obviously, the zoning ordinance doesn't allow for 8 units in that small a lot. Our feeling is that with the nature of the property, there has to be an economically useful way of using it. It's a lot that just can't be used as it is. And the only way you do this, the only way you can do this, is build something that there's a need for. And there is a huge problem with housing in Newmarket, as there is throughout the whole state. The governor recently said, New Hampshire population is growing. The statewide 2-bedroom vacancy rate was 6%. 0.6%. And a vacancy rate of 3 to 5% is considered healthy. So we're way below the vacancy rate, which is causing a lot of people not to be able to find housing and making housing very, very expensive for the people who want to move into Newmarket. We feel that the historical use as a warehouse is a non-conforming use, so we're sort of going from one non-conforming use to the other, and making it viable is important for this project to go forward.
We don't have any data that shows how you came up with the magic number of 8 units.
Mm-hmm.
What was the would 6 suffice? Would 4 suffice? You know, we're not given any information on it. We've got some nice lofty goals set up by, and quite frankly, some of the material I read in there was given to us last year too. So it's very, very similar. So it's a lot of it's boilerplate, and I'm looking for something that gives me a little bit more specifics to this project. Is there is the cost of rehabbing the thing, is that what's driving it?
To bring it up to code, bring all the life safety, the water lines, do a sprinkler system, meet all the ADA requirements. To get that up, I need
To pay the impact fee.
to pay the impact fees mainly. I have to.
Thank you.
I have to get that unit count high enough to be able to get my recoup.
The other thing that is important about this project is that there's a neighborhood sitting hard by the downtown area that is just dead. I mean, it doesn't have the vibrancy that you want in that part of the community. And what the projection is for this property and abutting properties that Ben owns is to build other housing units in this area and create a neighborhood. You can't really build a neighborhood unless you have a starting cornerstone. And you need a certain amount of people to start creating a neighborhood. And from my point of view, the success of the project counts on having a number of people living there. Because right now, you wouldn't want to live there.
Well, one of my big concerns is this is only part of that open space that's there. There's still a 1 acre parcel right next to it, that if we apply the same criteria for density to that 1 acre spot, basically we're going to have, I guess pretty close to Sliding Rock. You know, a lot of apartments crammed into a rather small space. And I don't know how to address that. Is there a way to look at both lots? And I mean,
If I will.
The ownership.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
I was going to say, as a board adjustment, every case is on its own individual merits, so you can take it in isolation.
I understand that, but it seems to me that somebody has thought of something down the road.
So there was a presentation to the planning board made about 1.5 years, 2 years ago about the eventual development of this properties. And what we need to do is we need to be in a position to buy a number of the other properties, and we need to create value there to buy them. And when we do, we will have a whole nother project that will become obviously come before both the ZBA and the planning board and the impact fee issue before we can do it. So it's going to have to comport with what you need in the way of smaller, less condensed housing. What the area, though, is really looking for is it's looking, according to your master plan, for more vibrancy. It's looking for more people living there and working there and spending their money there. So we think it's appropriate in light of the town's master plan that we take this step by step. And we feel that this particular project will work, and it will serve as a cornerstone for what we bring you next. When we bring you the other thing, if we go too far, you're going to stop us. We know that. So we know we're going to have to work within the constraints of what is reasonable.
My experience with these is that developers in general try to get as much real estate on the footprint as they can. And I understand it. The thing that, in my experience, it usually puts a quash on how many units you're going to put around it is the neighborhood. They show up in droves saying it's too much, it's too high. So given the fact that there hasn't been any public outcry about this, I mean, it's the only measurement we have is you know, my neighborhood's going to be ruined, not enough septic, you know, and I haven't heard any of that, so I'm inclined to understand why you want to get the 8 units if you've got the parking to do it.
I'm kind of curious. I mean, in concept, I'm agreeable to it. I would have liked to have had maybe some kind of a sketch that shows what it looks like, just to give me a better, warm, fuzzy feeling.
That'll be more when I go to the planning board. Just, you know, I don't want to. Still trying to catch up from those impact fees, so I can't spend all that money.
We'll get you relief.
Oh.
Just go to the
Wait,
planning
let's
board.
go.
We'll get you relief.
You can't afford to have the plans
Yeah.
done until you get the impact fee.
Well, his architects were cheap.
I know you wrote in here somewhere about parking. Yeah, obviously, you are gonna meet the requirements for parking, I assume, with 8 units?
I think I might be 2 spots. So I have 12 parking spots, and I'm required 2 per unit.
Yeah.
So I am 2 short, but I do have.
4 short.
Sorry, yeah, thank you. But I do have access to a lot more parking in that area.
Where?
At lot U416, I can do a lease of parking there. That's where Horizon Engineering
what?
is. So it's kind of a complementary use. Horizon Engineering is there. They obviously work during the day, and then at night they're gone. So it's just a good complementary use. Using them.
Which is something we do encourage in the ordinance.
So they'll have designated,
So what will happen is when Horizons is working during the day, usually they have a lot of guys out on the field, so there's empty spots. But at nighttime, you know, their hours are 9 to 5, say, and then my tenants will have the ability to park there. There is free parking during that timeline across the street that the town owns. I've never seen a car really parked there.
Are they required to have designated parking areas to meet the?
No, you're supposed to have X amount of,
Thank you.
I think it's 8 by 20. An 8 by 20 spot for each car.
Yeah. So I can fit the additional spots on this lot, but my fear is then I'm gonna have a lot more impervious soil, and there is a big problem with drainage. There's a creek that comes down there, and you have a new development going further down that is already impacting that creek, and it just can't take anymore. So if I add the additional parking on the other side where I do have ability to add the spots, I will be keeping the same impervious soil, but my goal is to reduce it.
You weren't here during the Mother's Day flood when the railroad tracks.
Yeah, I lived in town then.
You did.
Yeah.
I saw that go. I was standing right at the bottom of Jerry.
Oh, yeah, that was crazy. I was swimming.
My only question is, we also need a variance for parking?
That's a planning board.
It's plenty.
Yeah.
They waive it. If a waiver was requested.
Okay.
Is there any more discussion to be had?
Just, this has nothing. The services in that building now, water and sewer.
There is, it's an undersized line though.
There is.
There is water. It freezes up a lot though because there's no foundation.
Yeah.
So.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Well, anything on that lot, anything in that building would be better than what's there now.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Does that building have any historic
It doesn't. I checked with, my original goal was to get a,
historic grant? Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and, it's not historic.
What about across the railroad tracks?
On Jerry Ave, that one doesn't have it as well. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, you looking for a motion?
I'd be looking for a motion.
I'd like to make a motion that the CBA grant special exception.
Variances.
Variance,
Oops, where am I?
section 3.
I got out of order. Here. I'd like to make a motion that we grant a variance to the parcel containing a land area of about 855 square feet, is shown in plan marked land, Robert B. Reserve et al., trustees of the property of Boston and Maine Railroad.
To allow 8 units.
To allow 8 units.
I'll second that motion. We have a motion on the floor. Any discussion, please? Any more discussion? All set? Steve?
No, yeah, Sorry.
Wayne?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you again.
You're welcome. Be gentle on us now, first one.
Don't forget your impact fees.
Interest is securing every day.
All right. Item 3. Petitioner Bradley Kurth is requesting the following on real estate property with an address of 9 Creighton Street, tax map U3, lot 16, R4 zone. Variance, relief from section 32-87-2, setbacks to build a deck staircase that would be 4.5 feet from the property line where 10 feet is allowed. Is Mr. Kurth here? Did I get that right?
Looks like it's not here.
It's not us. Not us.
With, is the petitioner's not here?
No.
I really don't want to just, I think I'd like to extend it, give him the opportunity to get here for the next meeting.
Yeah, I would recommend continuing. There's a ZBA meeting scheduled for June
June 6th.
6th, so I would recommend that motion.
Can I get a motion to that effect?
Motion to table until June 6th.
To continue.
Continue on June 6th.
I will second
At what time?
that.
1900 hours Eastern Time.
There we go. 7 p.m.
He was military time order. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right. I said we weren't gonna get out of here before 10 o'clock. Looks like we could very easily get out of here.
It's already 5 after 12.
All right. Petitioner 11 Chapel Street LLC is requesting the following on real estate property with an address of 11 Chapel Street, tax map U2, lot 3, M2 zone. Variance, relief from the following sections. Section 32-89, dimensions table to permit a third residential unit on a lot containing 0.1946 acres. Gotta get that other grain of sand in there, right? Section 32-89, dimension table to permit a setback in excess of 10 feet. Is that correct? A setback in,
Yes, I think it's a maximum.
okay. And section 32-5, 1 and 3 to permit the expansion of a non-conforming use where a lot does not meet dimensional requirements. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm Chris Mulligan, an attorney from Bozen & Associates in Portsmouth. With me is Kate Connell, the owner of the property at 11 Chapel Street.
We know each other. He's been before us.
He has been before you.
Nice to see everybody in person.
Yeah, I think we were zooming in the last time we were before you, but it was,
With technical difficulties.
Diane, you look great.
Thank you.
So, just to overview of the property, this is a rather unique property in my opinion. It's at the corner of Chapel and Granite Street. There are 3 structures existing on the property as it stands now. There's a very severe grade from the property as it travels away from Granite Street down towards Main Street. And even though it has a Chapel Street address, the only access and driveway to the property functionally is the driveway on Granite Street. There are 2 standalone dwelling units on the property that are pre-existing and have been there for many, many years. Within the last several years, Mr. Connell essentially rebuilt the barn that was existing on the property and was in very poor condition. And that's what we're here for relief for tonight, is to request the ability to place a two-bedroom apartment in that barn structure. You may remember last year we were here, we got approval to use a portion of the barn structure for a retail project. That didn't prove out to fruition. We couldn't get that over the finish line. And Mr. Connell can explain, but efforts to introduce the retail use in that space have just not been successful. So we believe the highest and best use would be another small dwelling unit on the property, and I'll go through the variance relief we need in a second. But that takes advantage of the existing built environment on the site. This is essentially a fully developed site. There are basically very minimal, if any, physical changes to the site that we're proposing. This is really just a request for a use that would not otherwise be permitted. One thing I did want to address with you in the application and the materials I provided, I requested relief from section 32.32-5, 1 and 3 regarding nonconformities. When this was submitted, Mr. McDonough contacted me to ask me if he thought I was sure we needed that relief. And as I review both 32-5 subsection 1 and subsection 3, I agree with him. I do not believe they apply and that we do not need that relief. Subsection 1 refers to non-conforming uses. The use that we're proposing is actually a conforming use on this lot. It exists on this lot. Residential use is already there, and it's permitted in the zone, so it's not a non-conforming use. And then as far as Section 3 for a non-conforming lot, that actually only refers in subsection A to actions that change the boundary of the lot, which we're not seeking to do. The lot is staying as it is. So I would suggest, with the board's permission, I suppose, that you just permit us to withdraw the last bit of relief that shows up on your agenda this evening. That is relief from section 3.32-5:1 and 3. Again, I don't believe we need that relief.
When we make our motion, we should cite that when we make the motion.
I got it right here.
And we're talking about deleting that.
Yeah.
All right.
So we're left essentially with two-dimensional or two species of dimensional relief. One is that the amount of density we're proposing on this lot is in excess of what is permitted under your dimensional table. I think the requirement is a maximum of 6 units per 2 acres or something like that. We're well under that. This is a very small lot, obviously, but again, it's a fully developed lot. We're not changing any of the structures on the property. We're not adding structures to the property. We're just asking to take advantage of what structures are there. So I believe that it really comes down to whether or not a third unit is a reasonable use on this lot. As far as the setback in excess of 10 feet, again, that is an existing condition of the property. There is no way we could comply with a 10-foot maximum setback on this property. The 2 existing dwellings that are permitted and grandfathered don't comply with that either, but obviously the barn is set back well beyond 10 feet. So I think the dimensional relief is really very minimal because it's simply relief that it's based on characteristics of the property and the built environment on the property that we can't possibly change. So unless you have any questions, I can go through the variance criteria that, the 5 criteria you need to find to grant the variance, but I've prepared a memorandum that has been in your materials, so I think we can stand on that if you would prefer. One thing I would say is, as we heard from the last applicant, There is a very substantial need for additional housing. An additional modest dwelling in this neighborhood, I think, would contribute to alleviating that problem. We don't believe that adding another dwelling in what is already a relatively dense zone, and a zone that is one of the purposes of the M2 zone is to promote relative high density in a mix of uses. We think this fits nicely with that purpose. Again, it's a fairly unique lot in that it's the topography is very unusual. It renders a fair amount of the lot essentially unusable. But we feel that adding an additional dwelling unit would be in keeping with the town's master plan and wouldn't cause any undue burden to the neighborhood. And Kepler was informing me earlier today there are a number of multifamily dwellings and properties in the immediate vicinity, so we don't believe that there would be anything that's uncharacteristic of the neighborhood with this proposal. So unless you want me to go through the variance criteria, I think that's all we have, unless you have questions for
I
us.
have two questions.
Yes, sir.
In order for the addition of a third residential unit, what is required for acreage? Let's say, what is the compliance? Yeah.
Could you allow Eric to chime into this?
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, our project engineer, Eric Weinrib, is available by Zoom.
All right.
In case you want any questions for him on the site.
Hi, Eric. Haven't seen you in a while.
You have to let him in, apparently. He said you won't let him in.
Uh-oh.
Let me call.
We gotta get our IT guy in. Just hang in there.
That's why I was texting while we're.
Got all about Eric.
That's kind of
Yeah, there
difficult.
he is.
Oh, hey, you let Eric
There
in?
you go.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Eric, can you hear us?
I'm here. There you go.
We got the top of your head. There you
There
go.
you
go.
Hey.
6 per acre.
Okay.
Okay, so,
So
I'm
the-
sorry.
So just to do the simple math for me, Eric, what would the number of acres satisfy a third residential unit?
Half acre.
A half acre?
Yep. Yeah, it's 6 per acre.
6
in the
per
sign.
acre? So
Yep.
it's, yeah, okay.
Okay. And then my second question is, I was confused when I read to permit a setback in excess of 10 feet. I've always understood of less than 10 feet. What does that mean?
So in the M2 zone, there is a,
Okay, see, what's the section on that
Uh,
reference?
I believe it's your dimensional table 32-89.
Yeah,
Okay.
Right here.
no, this one.
Okay.
So there's a minimum, or excuse me, a maximum road setback of 10 feet.
A maximum
Yep.
road.
Yep.
In other words, you have a minimum setback of 5 feet, so that's the closest you can get to the road, if I'm interpreting this correctly, and a maximum of 10 feet, which is as far away from the road as you can be. So in this zone, the idea is to bring things close to the road, but not too close, to impede egress, I would imagine, or
Okay, thank
travel.
you.
But so this is already existing, and it's really about that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We went through the parking last time, didn't we?
Yeah.
Let's go through it again.
So, what we've shown on the plan is 3 spaces. And what we believe we're required to provide for off-street parking would be 5. And this is a project that will require approval from the planning board. And at the planning board, my understanding is we'll have to convince them to give us a waiver for the deficient parking.
What did we decide out on the street there?
So, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's an important point. What was out on the street, I don't know if you recall this, but we had actually, last year, the plan we had produced actually striped and lined the parking that was on the street, even though it's in the town's right-of-way. And at that time, we were requesting relief to be able to site parking between the principal dwelling and the street, which is another, it is prohibited in your ordinance. We withdrew that because that's not relief you can grant because that was not on our property. Those spaces, for all intents and purposes, are still there, but they're public parking. They're not dedicated to this particular property.
Okay.
As a practical matter, I don't know who else would find it useful or convenient to park there. So I think, you know.
So you're not including those?
No, we're not including that in the calculation, not at all.
All right.
We've got 3
Okay.
spaces in the back of the lot.
Good.
Thank you.
So I think the request for 3 spaces, that's under the jurisdiction of the planning board.
Correct.
That's correct, yeah, so it's not part of this discussion.
I was more curious about the parking out in the street.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but that's
Right.
why we brought it up last time, because he was showing them out in the street. And it was clearly not on their property. So
Gotcha. Understood.
he raised that.
Thank you.
And having spoken with the Public Works Director, it was never a problem before, so he had no problem with being a little magnanimous with it.
Sounds good.
And we appreciate that.
So, I guess the first, if I may, Mr. Chair, this first, the one that's, the variance request that's being withdrawn, the board agrees with that?
Yep.
If that's not applicable or not, make that determination.
Let's see. Why did I lose my space on that?
So, I got it. All right.
Oh, yeah, there it is, right there. And is it non-applicable? I mean,
The only, so after reading this 1,000 times and then discussing with the code enforcement officer, the only thing I can see where it is may be applicable is view 1A, and under 32-5, the last sentence, or last clause of the sentence, is other structures or uses of land shall be required to be in conformity with the provisions of these regulations. So,
The old catch-all.
yeah, that's right.
But
I don't, go ahead.
if I can interject, I mean, I think you've got to read that in conjunction with the prefatory clause, which provides that if a non-conforming use was discontinued for a period of 2 years, and subsequent use, and this is not a use that was discontinued, this is a brand new use.
Right. So I just, so yeah, I just want to
Yep.
lay the table out.
Yep.
And that's a relatively new clause because it was, we didn't always have that. And it caused us unknown problems.
Okay.
Remember?
Yeah.
And then the number 3 is, I think, self-explanatory.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Is there anybody on the public that would like to speak? Have at it. Sorry about that.
I am Dave Legault, 11 North Main Street, and I'm with the Newmarket Historical Society, the abutter to this property. And I'm not here to oppose it or anything. I just want to say that since, I assume you're the owner?
Yes.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Since the owner came on board, historically there has been issues with parking, with people using the lawn between the Historical Society, the Stone School Museum, and their property. Since then, a fence has gone in delineate the property. And one of the existing buildings, if you step outside, you step off of their property and right onto the, it's town historical society property. So we don't have a problem with the change of use, I guess. I am curious what there was a barn there that was replaced with the new structure. And I'm curious if there were any conditions that were required at that time when the barn was built.
I don't remember specifically. Do you remember? We didn't put any special conditions on it, did we?
I'll have to look into that.
We can look it up.
One of the things was.
If you want to step to the.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yes.
Caper Canal. One of the conditions was to get it into conformity, because it was in non-conformity, so we actually moved the footprint, did a lot of ledge blasting, or not ledge blasting, but, you know, site work, moved the structure away from the lot line, so that's probably one of the conditions.
Yeah. In terms of use, there's no real stipulation.
No.
Yeah. I know the intended use was some sort of retail or business.
Correct.
Yeah. So just to confirm, we don't have an issue with the change of use, trying to make that an apartment versus perhaps a small business or something. So providing that, I think our recommendation would be that the landlord, whether current or future, advise the tenants that the property where the fence is now is really the property line. It's not there for public use or anything. And other than that, we don't object to it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak to the matter? Okay, I'll close the public hearing, the public section of the meeting. One question I do have, I was looking at that, is the condition of that retaining wall is a little sketchy, isn't it? Is there any plans to do anything over there, or?
To the best of my knowledge, no, and that is actually, it's not on my property. That edge belongs to 5 Chapel, as discovered. So one of the stipulations for getting the commercial approval was if you do recall the previous site plan we had, it was for a structural engineered retaining wall to be put there, and it was physically just did not make any sense to do. So that remains the way it is. The parking and the sort of safety aspect of why that retaining wall is going to be there would be brought into consideration with this approval. There would be some site work to bolster that existing retaining wall on my property side, not on the actual retaining wall itself. So it's me creating a rock buffer that is not part of what's there already. So.
This would, if it were to be granted, we'd have to go back to the planning board too for a review.
Excuse me.
Do we have any more discussion to go? I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to grant a variance from section 3289 to permit a third residential unit and permit a setback in excess of 10 feet at 11 Chapel Street. Findings of fact are obviously the materials provided by the applicant.
I
I
have
will
a second from
second that.
James. All right, that being said, James, when you lead on the vote.
I'd love to with an eye.
Aye.
Aye.
Steve,
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
good luck.
Have a good
Take
night.
care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
We're all set. Thank you, Eric.
Bye, Eric. All right. Well, I don't have anything else. Is there any new business to bring before the board? Is there any new business to bring before the board?
Welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here. We'll work on a better package situation, you know, for our board members.
Let's adjourn this and
Yeah.
get off of Channel 13.
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Let's just have it.
12:30.
Doesn't feel that late at
Yeah.
all.
No.